This is Monday, July 17th, 1967. Yesterday I called Penny. We had a long telephone conversation and...
Monday, May 30th, 2011. David Holzman's diary uses several modes of filming, but generally they fall into three categories. David's direct address to the camera, where he reports on his plans, activities, and feelings. Scenes out on the street, and encounters and interactions with others. The street scenes have a weird progression. At first, he just seems interested in capturing life in all of its raw detail. But gradually, he fixates on filming women. There's one on the subway. There's one across from his apartment.
The name on her doorbell is S. Schwartz.
David doesn't seem to realize it, but his project of filming the truth behind his life is as much about getting at the mystery of women.
Schwartz being the name for her ordinary parts, and the S being the name for her more mysterious side.
When he talks about his girlfriend Penny, he does it in terms of images. And the only time we see them together involves his filming her.
David.
Yes.
When they inevitably break up, he doesn't seem very disturbed. Not nearly as much as he is in a scene where he yells at his camera as if it were his partner in a dead-end relationship.
You have made me do things. Why? What? I don't... Why? Why doesn't this help me? Why doesn't this help me? What the fuck do you want? I'm sorry.
But the most spontaneous, unscripted, and live scene in the film involves an encounter with a pre-op transsexual who randomly pulls up to David on the street.
How come you don't? And she's not looking for a good lay. I need a good hump today. Is this a dirty movie? You want to be a stuntman for a stag movie?
Actor Kit Carson was allegedly so intimidated that he couldn't stay in character, leaving the cameraman to act as David. It's an interesting reversal. Whereas all the other women retreat from David's camera, here a woman, or rather a man acting as a woman, directs her female libidinal desire at full force, and David, the character, chooses to retreat. He'd much prefer to watch.
No, I can't do it again. Listen, you want in later, don't you?
I think I'd rather make one.
Make one?
No.
Oh, what are you, asexual? What they call that? P-sexual? D-sexual? What do they call that? Person that doesn't like both. Either. What do they call that?
A voyeur.
A what?
A voyeur.
Oh, you're a voyeur. What's that, something new?
In hindsight, this scene seals David's fate. From here on out, he doesn't really engage with anyone. He becomes increasingly trapped in his own world, even as he continues to take his camera to the street, as if it were a shield or an invisible cloak.
Great, look. I just got it. Look at this face.
The images he captures are increasingly a reflection of his own self-absorption.
How do I do it now?
And in one scene, the connection between his filmmaking and his sexuality is made plain.
Since she's been gone, it's been about 3 days. Get back to the real stuff now. You know, masturbation.
These days, so much of David's voyeuristic libido can now be satisfied on the internet with no risk at all.
Get that thought so you can think of anything. Think of pigs. Think of trains going in tunnels. Think of bagels. You know, I mean, you're not limited to women. I mean, when you do come back to thinking about women now,
Or would David reject those virtual outlets precisely because they're available for him to consume safely? It isn't enough for him to just watch.
Everything is so perfect. That everything is so perfect that they have to be kept.
But to take what he finds beautiful and make it his own, the artistic impulse at its basest.
this random, particular, accidental state is so meaningful. It's so touching. It's so touching. It's so beautiful. This is the famous Kent Hotel, West Side, New York, West 71st Street. This is my apartment.
Wednesday, June 1st, 2011. I'm visiting the old shooting locations of David Holzman's diary on the Upper West Side. This is Needle Park, where I'm attempting to recapture cinematographer Michael Waldley's long handheld shot.
What he did was, instead of the normal way of kind of holding the camera, he cradled it in his arms so that the lens was kind of facing out that way. So it was really at eye level with the people who were sitting on the benches. And he just walked by them, not even looking at them, so that they weren't, even though the lens was quite close up in their faces, they weren't really aware that somebody was taking their picture. It was just a guy walking by with a camera. And also he did it for an heroically long time. You know? So it turned out to be a wonderful shot.
It's plain that this shot just doesn't have the same effect with an iPhone camera. Part of it is that the benches are now spaced out. You don't get the same effect of people squeezed together side by side. Personal space has a different meaning than it used to, in the physical world as well as the virtual. And when I realized that I can reasonably approximate Waldley's shot, something that took him a lot of effort and planning, simply by holding a smartphone and walking, it just makes me realize how cheap and easy images are these days. What's to separate one image from another, except an understanding of how and why they were made? David Holzman's diary will always be the first of its kind, and will always last, as long as we can understand the effort, the thought, and the emotions behind a world of images.
I'm dreaming of something now, of something now. On the horizon, the nature's dry, and all the groovy ones.
Listen, you want even later downstairs?